So a warm welcome to everybody on the channel, and today it's my great pleasure to introduce you all to Ravindra Murthy. Welcome, Ravindra.
Thank you. Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
So I thought that it would be a good idea to have Ravindra on the channel. Recently we've been having some private discussions about the spiritual path, and he wouldn't admit this, but he's quite knowledgeable on non-dual Vedism. And so I thought we'd benefit from that. Now, in general, there's a great similarity between non-dual Vedic teachings and those of the other empty school of the Tibetan tradition, especially when it comes to Kashmir Shaivism. And it's very difficult to actually tell the difference between these two positions. And so it's really helpful to have somebody who has some experience and knowledge on the topic. So, Ravindra, the first thing I wanted to know, and I think this is something most people aren't clear on, is what is the difference between the dual Vedas and the non-dual Vedas? I mean, most people have encountered the traditional Hindu school and have even done some meditation or some practice associated with that. But I think far fewer people really have any insight into what the non-dual Vedas are.
So your question is, what is the difference between dualism and non-dualism? Am I correct?
As it is taught in the Vedic tradition, in the Hindu tradition.
Okay. Yeah. The dualism posits two or more independently existing entities. This is only a provisional concession that is made in the initial teachings of the Vedanta. Then the student is taken in a stepwise manner by the teacher or the guru, and the student will ultimately cognize that this duality that he had come to believe in was actually an apparent duality and not really existing as it were, but there is only one non-dual principle which is indivisible, even though it might appear divided. And we come to this cognition based upon certain irrefutable facts of human experience on which we reason, and we come at this as a fact and not as a matter of belief.
Yeah, so this is a very important point, I think. Many people will be familiar with this position. The difference between kind of blind faith and informed faith, something where you actually can see directly for yourself the truth of one of these kind of tenets or philosophical positions. So as I gather from what you said, what you're saying is that there is really no difference between the dual Veda and the non-dual Veda. It's merely a matter of a progression in understanding in regards to the student.
Correct. The provision of duality is accorded a relative existence only as an initial teaching tool, because that is how all the students enter the portals of Advaita Vedanta. So if the guru tells him this duality is a figment, the student will be bewildered. So he will take him in a stepwise manner. Ultimately, the student will be able to cognize within himself, by himself, that the duality is only an apparent reality, but not really real.
And so you said that there were some irrefutable truths that point to this understanding of non-duality. Could you give us an example of one of these?
Sure. There are various methodologies in Advaita Vedanta to see this as a fact, but the one with which I am familiar is based upon the fundamentals of human experience. Vedanta is very, very unique in that, unlike all the other non-Vedantic approaches to truth or reality, it takes into consideration the entire spectrum of human experience. What I mean by that is, all the non-Vedantic branches of philosophy or science they accord reality only to one part of the human experience, which is a waking state. They have relegated the dream and the dreamless deep sleep state as being simply adjuncts and not really real. That is the modus operandi, if you will, of the other non-Vedantic approaches. Now, Vedanta, however, begs to differ in that approach. It takes into consideration the entire spectrum of dream, deep sleep, and wakeful state, which is universally expressed by all human beings, all 7 billion people of us. I dreamt, I slept, I am awake. Every human being can relate to this experience. Then Vedanta will ask you, who is the I that witnessed these three states? And it will show that I is the only indivisible reality. Would you like me to go further on this step here, or would you like me to stop?
I think this is a really important point.
Yes.
I would just like to interject here. And so in what way is I present during the state of deep sleep? I understand that we have we're aware of a subject-object dichotomy in our dreaming state and our waking state. But for most of us, then we have no awareness. I think for all of us, we have no awareness in the deep sleep state.
Right.
So what is the connection between these two?
Yes, very important question. In fact, this is the single most important principle that will help us to put I as an independent principle. So let me start with our experience of deep sleep. We have conventionally accepted deep sleep as a state of unconsciousness. Now, we all say when we come out of the dream state, we say, I slept. I slept peacefully. I experienced neither myself, the subject, nor the world, the object. That is universally experienced by all individuals. Now, unless you participated in that state, there is no way you could have claimed the experience as I slept, nor could you have described the experience as being so and so. There must have been a witnessing principle that witnessed the absence of subject and object. And it should also accompany you in the waking state to be able to inform the waking intellect through which it expresses itself as, I did not see the subject or the object. But there is no question that there was a witnessing principle, because unless and until it formed a part of your integral experience, you could not have related to your experience of deep sleep as being so and so, nor could you have ascribed the state to yourself. The problem is we have come to associate consciousness as being equivalent to saying that there is the subject-object relationship present, and that is the standard criterion by which we have come to affirm the presence or absence of consciousness. Vedanta takes you to that experience of deep sleep where you experienced no body, no mind, no senses, no word, and yet you say, I slept. You did not participate there as a psychosomatic apparatus. You were there purely as that witness, and that witnessing principle is that pure consciousness and existence. That is how Vedanta establishes I as that principle of existence and consciousness.
Right. So to clarify for the audience then we have this basic preconception that the conscious state involves duality. We have subject and object. So on this point, then the other empty school, in general Tibetan Buddhism, agree with what you're saying, Advaita Vedanta, is that actually this is a non-dual state, but we assume it to be a dualistic state, where there is me receiving phenomena. Now, the more difficult aspect is how we link that to the perception within the deep sleep state. So as I gather, what you're saying is that we still have this observing principle of I, but it does not possess objects of perception, and therefore it is non-dualistic. And because of that, then by inference, what we come to understand is that there is something indivisible and non-dual that persists through all experience, that is this singular I. Is that correct, Ravindra?
Yes, yes. And also one important point to be made is in the empirical science or the empirical philosophy or any branch of philosophy, we have come to accept that consciousness is born in the body. Therefore, where there is body above a certain neurological threshold, it gives rise to consciousness. Mm-hmm. But deep sleep, within your own experience, tells you experience to no body. You experience no mind. You experience no senses. You experience no worlds. Thereby, these are all mere adjuncts and not the essence of the I. The adjuncts appear in a state of duality, either wakeful state or the dream state. But even without the adjuncts, the I will remain in its eternal state as the pure consciousness of I in deep sleep without the association of body, mind, senses.
Are you saying agents, as in the actors?
Adjuncts.
Adjuncts.
Yeah.
Okay.
In other words, they come and go, but the I never leaves you.
Yeah, I see. Yeah. So I'm going to sort of backtrack a little bit, because we're basically coming to the result of the Advaita Vedanta path. And I think we need to just pull back a little bit to be able to better understand what this is all about. And there's a few principles I think most people have become familiar with, and that is the idea of these two, being the Brahman and the Atman. And I was wondering if you could just explain a little bit about that, but also, or specifically, in the context of the non-dual Veda.
Yes. Brahman, Atman, God, divinity, self, capital SELF, all represent the same principle of I. I, not as an embodied principle rising within a body, but that eternal witness in which a psychosomatic apparatus may take its appearance, along with a corresponding world. Mm-hmm. And if you wish, I can take it one step further, just to say, or just to see it as a fact of life, how I is not intrinsically linked to the body. Mm-hmm. But if you want me to stop here, I'll stop here.
Yeah, I mean, just to recap that, then what you're saying is both Brahman and Atman are merely aspects of this one indivisible I.
Correct.
So in the context of the dual Vedas, it's a provisional representation of the Atman as being something separate from the Brahman. Is that correct?
Correct. In fact, even the label witness is only a provisional concession, because a witness comes into quote-unquote existence only if there is something to be witnessed.
I see. It arises in dependence upon something to be aware of.
When there is no something to be witnessed, it is only I alone.
I see. I without the observing quality.
I always is always eternally witness.
Okay.
But when there is nothing to be cognized, it will remain in its own state. For example, deep sleep is our experience. It
Okay.
didn't experience anything because there was nothing else to be experienced.
So this pure and indivisible I, in that state is what we would call Brahman. And then when there is a witnessing objects arising to awareness, then we conceptualize it as Atman. Is that correct?
No.
No.
Whether you use the word Brahman or Atman, they all represent that same witnessing principle of consciousness and existence. That's it. They're all various names that are given. Brahman is a term that is used as an initial teaching, because if the teacher tells the student, you are that, the student will get confused. Here I am, a limited being, and my teacher is telling me I'm unlimited. He must be seeing something exotic that I'm not privy to. So what the guru will tell you is
some mystical experience.
yes. He's going to say Brahman he's going to introduce the concept of Brahman as an eternal and infinite principle. And ultimately the student will cognize within himself that there is no distinction. I am Brahman. That is the ultimate understanding that the student comes to.
And then could you just cover another point I think a lot of people have confusion about, and that in this system, what is the source or the creator of the universe? Well, there's two questions really. Where did everything come from? And is there a purpose for its manifestation?
Yes, very good question again. I will answer it from two perspectives. One, from the perspective of a student who comes to this, where the student has taken the world to be real. To that student, the initial provisional concession made is the world is coming from Brahman or Atman. And we can address it, how it appears to be so can be addressed at a later point. Then, once the student cognizes, or once the understanding of the student culminates in that absolute principle, he will see the world itself was nothing but Brahman alone appearing to itself as the world. So, the question of why the world arose at some point becomes, it lacks meaning, because if you say why, it is implying causality, where there was a cause and an effect. That necessarily requires a basis in time. Once the student goes to that ultimate cognition of Atman or the Brahman or the non-dual principle, he will find that there is no question of time or space there. So there is no causality, simply does not appear there. And it is a very simple observation how the world could arise from the Brahman while it never became something other than the Brahman. Classically, it is evident in the experience of every single human being when he enters the dream world. You can see that there is complete reproduction of the wakeful state with the me and the non-me, that is the world, time, space, its own laws. And the student is asked, where do you think that world came from? The answer will generally be, it must have come from me. But the student is asked to cognize, please make a distinction between the me and the I. We can again get to that a little bit later. I'm sorry if I'm digressing a little bit here.
Not at all. I think this is all very helpful. So we have a similar principle in Buddhism as well, and that we teach that the perceived world that is one of separation, is an illusion. But really the question arises to mind is, why does delusion or illusion arise? Why is it there in the first place? If there's this pure principle or this unchanging, inseparable, pure Brahman, the indivisible I, then what is the basis for confusion? How is it that we mistake that which is non-dual for dual? And why does the dream arise?
Yes, again, excellent question. Ignorance is natural. When we are born, at the age of 5, we start the alphabets, we learn the numbers, we go on acquiring quote-unquote knowledge of things external to us. But what is not obvious to pretty much the entire humanity, deep within us, we are ignorant about our own true nature, what that I really represents. And a teacher or a guru who knows this will ask the student to conduct an inquiry. And once the ignorance gets replaced with knowledge, then all these questions simply don't arise. Ignorance, it is a law of manifestation. In any state where there is quote-unquote manifestation, certain laws will be there. For example, it has whatever that principle that gives rise to the world has given gravity as a certain law. For example, in the waking world, I cannot fly. But in the dream state, it has its own laws. I can fly. And it will not generate any surprise whatsoever in me. We swallow it hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah.
As a complete reality. So the point is, the manifestation has its own laws as directed by that source. And in that source, there are 7 billion me's. A me notion arises, and each of them will latch itself onto a given psychosomatic apparatus. For example, this body of Ravi, which is 5'8", 66 years old, will have no surprise whatsoever. When he goes to dream tonight, he will find himself in British Columbia or Vancouver.
Yeah.
I'm here sitting in Tennessee, sleeping here in Tennessee. I might find myself as a 25-year-old youngster. No surprise whatsoever. I may be shaking hands with Choga. So, whatever that principle decides to do in that state, it will happen. So, the ignorance replacing the knowledge, rather knowledge replacing the ignorance, will help you to cognize this manifestation is happening on its own accord. It's happening. Why? We cannot answer this question. But the real question is, number one, is it really separate from me? And once you establish that, then that question will not arise.
Once you realize the inseparability of phenomena. Can you just explain the difference between I and me then? Because you've mentioned it a few times.
Excellent question. This is again one of the foundations of the entire Advaita Vedanta. Me, now I will start from the perspective of a student who is just entering the portals of this. We all carry this. When somebody is asked, who are you? Suppose you ask me, who are you? I say, I am Ravi. My name is Ravi. I am 66 years old. I reside in Tennessee. My father is so and so. I was born. And these are all the things where I is being identified with the body. And the belief is, as long as this body is alive, I have I, and this hand is mine. This I is mine. This ear is mine. If I pick up something, I am picking up whatever that thing I'm picking up, all the actions I'm picking up. Now, if this me were intrinsic to the body, that is, I was intrinsic to the body, it is linked to this body, it should have accompanied me across the entire spectrum of my experience. In other words, if this body is gone, I am gone. If this body is gone, me is gone. So it is all entirely dependent upon this body being alive. Now, let us question that. I, as Ravi, 66-year-old, transacting as me in this state, will have a different psychosomatic apparatus also operating as me in the dream state. If you put the two states, the dream state and the waking, let us say this is the wakeful state and let us say this is the dream state, the I or the me that appears in each of the two states are entirely different. But I claim both. Therefore, the waking me does not go into the dreaming me. The dreaming me does not come into the waking me. They only go into the I. That is where the witnessing principle gave rise to the thought, a me notion which identifies itself with a certain psychosomatic apparatus in whatever way it decides to do it. So, me is a notion which rises in that I, and all notions have a corresponding object. So the me notion which is interacting with Choga on this forum is identifying itself with this body of Ravi. Tonight, another me notion will arise, and that notion will identify itself with a 25-year-old body. But the I is the unaffected spectator. It witnessed the me that identified with a 66-year-old body, the me that identified with a 25-year-old body. In fact, even strictly looking at our waking state, we can look at this. When I was a 5-year-old boy, who are you? I was pointing to that 5-year-old boy, the body of the 5-year-old. I am Ravi. Then he became a 12-year-old boy. He was a little taller, maybe a little bit more knowledge, hopefully. Then he identified, that also he called as I. So if you see, I keeps on changing throughout the life. There is a complete change in the body. There is a complete change in the intellect. We can also extend it, let us say, if the I was entwined with the body, we can ask an amputee. Let us say he was born with 4 limbs. Let us say he goes to a war, sustains an injury, loses 2 of his legs. Does he lose a little bit of the I with it? No. That means I is a principle that transcends the body. And the only way this body is known is through a me notion that rises in that I. I hope I didn't digress too much.
No, it's a very clear elucidation of how we are deluded. And so what comes to mind is this question that is there an end to delusion? I mean, it seems that this kind of ignorance is fundamental, and because of that, then the apparent world manifests. But is there an end to delusion?
Is there an end to?
End to delusion.
Oh,
to our
yeah,
illusory
only
world.
knowledge alone can replace it. What happens is, every notion, that is, the mind is designed to operate in a certain way. The mind, through the senses, will look at the world. The naming process is occurring here. Senses only report on the form. Now, every notion that arises in the mind has a corresponding object outside. With the ignorance, that is how things are happening. Once the Guru asks him, please find out where this thought is arising from, that is the me notion, where is it arising from? And this is purely for depiction, I'm going to say this. The mind is, let us say, looking outward. The Guru says, all you have to do is look at the source of the mind, then there is a turn, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And when he looks at the source, that is the I, the mind ceases to be a mind. Because at no point was there something called mind. It was I, or the consciousness, in a state of duality, gave rise to mind on the one hand and matter on the other. But the source was always the I. So I as mind perceived I as matter.
And so this is the fundamental basis of the delusion then, this separation
Correct.
of I
Correct.
into
Correct.
perceived matter,
Yes.
perceiving mind.
Once you recognize the me notion is nothing but a projection of consciousness, as it were, then you recognize the me notion was a mere delusion that I was hanging on to. But the actual reality is I.
And for the person who realizes this truth, realizes the indivisibility with Brahman, then does that person still manifest in the world to others? Or do they cease to manifest?
Of course. Of course. As long as there is an individual looking at another individual, that relationship will continue to hold. A gnani will not stop seeing his body. By gnani, I mean somebody who has cognized this truth.
What's the term?
He doesn't stop
Vijnana.
seeing the body.
Mm-hmm.
But he knows what it is.
Mm-hmm. So for the person who realizes this truth, then appearances still arise, but they no longer have a dualistic perception.
Of course. In fact, it is not under his control.
Oh.
It is
Whose
not under
control is it under?
The control is that the I, which is the impersonal reality. Whatever it decides to do, it will do.
And what is the basis for these decisions? What is the will that wishes to manifest?
Why did the gravity in the waking state, why does it pull us downward? Why not upward? We don't have answers to these questions. That is just the way it is. Let us first agree on the facts. Whether we can explain it intellectually or not, that is not our... Facts are facts.
Mm-hmm. So then in this interpretation, very much then this Brahman that we are not separate from becomes as if it were God, right? We can define
Yes.
that as God.
Yeah. You can call it God, divinity.
But there is no separate individual from this God.
There is no separate individual from the perspective of the self or the Atman or the I.
Yeah.
But as long as the individual does not know his true nature, there is the continued individuality.
And so once that individual recognizes their true nature, do they cease to exist as something separate from Brahman? I think this is the question that came to my mind.
No, they will continue to exist. The body is not going to disappear.
Mm-hmm.
A gnani will go on with his activities, whatever that, but he recognizes who is calling all the shots.
Mm-hmm.
It is not that he will live like a vegetable. He's not.
Yeah.
He
They
will
often say
continue
that
to
about
engage.
Buddhas.
He will continue to engage in all the activities, but he knows it is all happening at the behest of that principle. Just as, why does Ravi become some other, for example, I'm a physician, why does Ravi become an engineer in his dream state? That is all at the behest of that.
But for the question is, for someone who recognizes that all appearances are illusion, then for them, why do these dreams arise? Is it because there's some separate will that's associated with Brahman that wants to manifest that?
That is just the way it is. And in fact, the word illusion should be very carefully noted. Many people equate illusion with unreal.
Right. Yeah.
That is not so, because these are rooted in reality. Reality does not give rise to unreality. In this state, Ravi's body is real, Choga is real, Choga students are real. They all hold their relative reality. The point to be made is the contents of the state hold their relative reality in that given state. But the absolute reality transcends all this.
Yeah, we have a similar division in the Buddha Dharma as well. So we talk about provisional reality and ultimate reality. And it's taught that the provisional and the ultimate are not something separate.
Correct. We come to cognize that there was whatever we accepted provisionally never existed so, in the sense they all held a relatively reality. But our nature, our intrinsic, irreducible essence is absolute reality.
And so delusion in itself then is not something false. It's not something unreal. It's just the way we identify with that. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. For example, Go ahead.
Could you just explain the terminology Advaita Vedanta to us?
Terminology?
Yeah, well, Advaita Vedanta.
Oh, Advaita. First of all,
sorry for my pronunciation.
That's okay.
Advaita.
That's okay. No problem. No problem. First of all, Dvaita is duality. Advaita is non-duality. Anytime the word "a" is added in Sanskrit, it is non.
Okay.
Dvaita is duality, Advaita is non-duality. Vedanta, the Vedas, which are the ancient scriptures of the Vedas, they have given two sets of teaching. One set of teaching refers to the religious injunctions of doing a certain type of worship. Do this, do that. Where an individual is accorded a prominence and he does various meditation or a worship, whatever that thing is.
Religious observances. That's
correct. Yeah. All the practices where an individual is still the central agency of action. Then a certain portion of the Vedanta, which usually appears towards the end of Vedas. Anta, Veda plus Anta. Anta means end.
End. Okay.
End. So something that appears towards the end of Vedas is typically directed to this wisdom of, hey, you are not an individual. You are that infinite and eternal principle. That is called Vedanta because that part of the teachings usually appear towards the end of Vedas. Veda, it appears at the end of Veda, so it is Veda Anta. And the other way to see it is, once you cognize this truth, it is the end of knowledge.
Oh, I see.
It is the absolute knowledge. So there are
Anta means the end.
Correct.
What does Veda mean?
Correct.
Yeah. And what does Veda mean?
Veda, honestly, I don't know the specific meaning for the term Veda. I do not know.
Okay.
Yeah. basically there are four Vedas: Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Sama Veda, Atharvana. These are the four principal canons of.
Yeah. So in Tibetan, the word we use is rik, which means kind of like awareness or knowledge. So we translate this as rik chepa for the Vedic, and I think the term we use is rik. So rik is either awareness or consciousness or intellect, possibly. So in general, then our translations are pretty good from Sanskrit. So it must have something like that.
I do not know the exact. I will look it up and I will let you know.
Yeah, you have to tell. Well,
You asked me a good question. I do not know.
We'll have to have another conversation because there's much more to talk about. But I was wondering if you were aware of this modern phenomena of Neo-Vedanta, this kind of Neo-Advaita Vedanta. It seems to be most of what you hear these days comes from people who are promoting this position. And to me, it seems very unclear. It seems to me to be some kind of modern invention, and especially very popular in the West. Have you had any experience in this?
Choga, with all due respects, all these terms, honestly, the truth of Vedanta is timeless. There is nothing new. Nothing new can. This truth is beyond time and place. And that being so, this question of what is called neo, which I believe the word equates with something new or a new approach, I personally disagree with the way it is being taught. I do believe that our ancient sages, they were very wise in saying this truth has to be conveyed in a specific manner, with a one-to-one dialogue taking place between the guru and the student, because the doubts will rise in the mind of the student, and only a guru who knows the absolute truth can convey the truth, because there is a certain specific method to teach this. And I'm afraid that the way it is being conveyed in very many of the YouTube, I don't mean to put down anybody. I'm just stating a fact. I do believe it is really being seen as an intellectual exercise. People are, quote unquote, getting brainwashed. It is not so. I don't believe that they are really grasping the truth. That is my humble opinion.
Yeah.
So I don't subscribe to Neo Advaita, none of that. I
have to agree with your interpretation, because it seems that many people think that just hearing that nothing is separate is enough to come to realize the truth of non-duality. And to me, that's crazy. And outwardly, how it manifests is people seem to become a little bit, like you say, kind of brainwashed or very kind of numb in a way. Like nothing matters, everything is not separate. And they lose all their kind of humanity and compassion. And so to me, it's quite dangerous. Because this path is not easy, is it, Ravi?
It is. The truth is very simple, Choga, but it is subtle.
Yeah.
And a guru, I believe somebody who knows this can convey this. And again, I'm not boasting. Divinity blessed me with a good teacher who taught me this in the traditional way. And I do see a sea of difference between what is going on the YouTube and the traditional way.
Do you mind sharing with us who your teacher was?
My own father.
Oh, your own father. Oh, wonderful. All right. Your father recently passed away, is that correct?
Yeah, he passed away in February at the age of 91. Yes, and his teacher was a very famous, not merely famous in the sense of having multiple, of course there was no YouTube in those days, not having multiple followers. In the way he brought forth the truth to the whole world. You might have heard of Shankaracharya.
Yes.
by many of the learned members of this truth, he is considered the 20th century Shankara who descended on the earth
Wow.
to bring forth the teachings of Shankara, because they were all in Sanskrit. All in Sanskrit, and they're very, very difficult. He wrote over 200 books, this guru of my father.
Wow.
And I was fortunate to have inherited this from my father, who in turn inherited from that 20th century Shankara. And I bow to that divinity.
Yeah. Very fortunate to have the lineage. It's something that seems to be extremely important in the Tibetan tradition as well. Well,
As I said,
thank
in
you
fact,
very
I had
much,
a
Ravindra.
respect. I'm sorry to I just wanted to add,
Yeah.
as a boy, as a young man, even as a middle-aged man, I had respect for my father. But once I got into this with my father in the last 15 to 20 years, I developed a reverence. The respect, reverence, I believe there's a difference. And I deeply revere my father as my guru.
Yes. And wonderfully blessed to have had that connection, and especially to have the connection with the lineage. And so I'd like to thank you so much for sharing this afternoon your knowledge on the non-dual Vedas. And I'd like to ask you to come back sometime and continue on our conversation, because I think these are things that would be beneficial to many people. So
It'll be my pleasure, Choga, and I thank you for giving me an opportunity and sparing me your time. I'll be delighted to hold a conversation anytime, and whatever little I know, I'll be happy to share with you all.
And I think we're all going to look forward to that. So thank you again. And then to everyone, thank you for joining us. And bye for now. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.